You are a beautiful sight to behold. It is an honor and joy to be together with you on this second Sunday. Everybody who doesn't live in New York City wants to be in New York City. New York City on Advent on the way to Christmas is its own kind of greetings. Greetings on behalf of your brothers and sisters, the Christian Church, disciples of Christ, and Pennsylvania region and the Western Virginia region. We are one. All peace. Always. We find ourselves in the second Sunday of Advent. And this calls us to, and really the second Sunday of Advent insists upon us residing. Hope comes to visit. And in the Bible, when God comes to visit, and the things of God come to visit, they're like a relative who never lived. It's more than a visit. It's coming home. It's very hard. We're well on our way to our visit, our journey to Bethlehem that we reproduced here. It is a beautiful journey today. On the second Sunday of Advent, John the Baptizer always appears on the scene. Say John the Baptizer. It's wonderful to have great teachers. And my history professor at the seminary said, I just can't say John the Baptizer. So, well, why not? So I call him the Baptizer. He said, I don't want the Baptists in the school to get their head inflated. So when he mentioned that in class one time, one of the students who was Baptist, he said, he's definitely a Baptist. Why can't you just claim that? And get on. Doesn't mean he doesn't love you. He doesn't have this. And he said, well, how do you? He said, before he was even born, his mother was saying, you will not drink. You will not drink. You will not drink. He said, John's a Baptist. And a baptizer. And he arrives on the scene the second Sunday of Advent every year. And the tale of the preparer's birth story is recorded. It is not wasted. It's important. So much so that the author pens it down in an orderly account. Read the beginning. Make sure that we know the things that are important for that which is coming. But these birth stories scare me a little bit. Birth narratives concern me because not all deliveries in life are smooth. Not all deliveries are easy. John's birth announcement calls us to a new way of life, a reformatting. And it starts with his mom and his dad. Right off the bat, when God visits these two, watch out. Don't blink. Something is about to happen. And it moves quickly. And the good news is that God is still visiting God's people. Just as God visited Zechariah in his place of business, and Elizabeth, perhaps in her place of deepest pain, deepest confusion, don't blink, because God is visiting us. God is visiting me, and God is visiting you. And this really ought to excite you, enliven you, and even energize you, even if sometimes it can scare you. It enlivens me, it can energize me, and it can scare me. Really, really glad the candles are lighted. They make such a great image for us. That right now, 2 candles burn and remind us that God is closer to us, really, than even the beating of our own heart. This can excite us. This can enliven us. This can energize us. What do we start with? Faith. And we go to hope. And then next Sunday, we'll be visited with joy. Always the pink candle on the 3rd Sunday. And then we'll look for peace that God promises to come to the world. And when these things visit us, they don't just stop by temporarily. They stick around and stay. They stick around and live. They stick around and shape us and form us in new ways. The best example that I can come up with today of getting energized, enlivened, and excited is my wife when our 2 daughters, who no longer live in our home, come to visit us. It is a big deal. That's why I got up at 12:30 and drove to the airport, because yesterday they were coming to visit. And I didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to blink. But it's incredible to watch my wife when they start coming to town. It's a big deal. We start lighting candles and preparing to receive them. Her whole body changes. Her whole countenance changes. There's something special and exciting that comes. And when my girls come to visit, a new sense of hope comes too. Always something new that's arriving on the scene, and I don't want to miss it. I don't blink. With these 2, there's always something possible. Minor proxy for other people. Some of the things that they make possible delight us, make us really happy. Last night we celebrated a graduation. One finished up her graduate program, a Master's of Business Administration. We were real proud of her. We wanted to celebrate that. And she's brought home a guy who she's going to marry in April, and he's going to have a birthday this week. So we had to have a birthday party. And my mom and dad were doing well and could get out, so we'd celebrate that. So we had to just pull it all out for these things. We had to light 2 candles, one for graduation, one for a birthday, with all that comes with it. Some of the things that my girls make possible infuriate us. It's not always easy. It's not always good. It's not always understandable. People don't always do what I want them to do. And a lot of times they know better than I do. But it still doesn't stop us from stopping and saying, what's going on here? Some of the things that they make possible even bring sadness and pain. Because life will not always be perfect. And as much as I wanted to make sure that nothing would ever hurt them, I could never promise that with a straight face. No one can provide maximum protection. The best we can do is offer one another minimum protection, maximum support. So some of the possibility delights, some infuriates, some even pains us. It's like the northeastern region of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. All 3 of those things are possible. It's like the Park Avenue Christian Church. All 3 of those things are possible. It's like every church body I know. All 3 of these things are possible, but there's always possibility and there's always hope. With God's very hope, Every pain is reformatted and not wasted. I have a strong theological hunch that God hates waste. And the things that come our way must not be wasted. Just ask Elizabeth in the text. She knows. Ask Zechariah in the text. He knows. It's not always easy for us to access the past and the times in which Scripture comes to us. That's some of the things we were doing in Sunday school this morning, was trying to get into the text a little bit, right? The goal of reading text is exegesis, to draw out of what was happening there in order to have a sense of what's happening here. What was happening there, how does it apply to what's happening here? And to do it in a biblical way, which means saying the same thing the apostles were saying and doing it in the same way. The form never fights the function. I digress. And then you've got to exegete the people. That's why you have to write your own sermons. They don't make sense, something that's written for somebody else. It just doesn't work. So the form has to follow the function. When my daughters were little, I was in the store with them, which is not my native land. And we were getting the groceries. And there was another woman who was down the aisle, and she had two sons who were helping her by putting stuff in the buggy. She was tired, right? Been there. Little brother said something to big brother punched little brother in the face. Little brother punched big brother in the stomach. Mother slapped them both across the cheek and said, "We don't hit." My little girl says, "Daddy, I don't believe him." And so as we think about these things, the role of the text and the form of the message have to be the same. But it's tricky, because our job is to let the Holy Scripture steward us into new ways and into newness. And while I'm not terribly comfortable with the term of ownership these days, I like stewardship. We do want to own these texts a little bit more, so that when we're out and about, we can pull them out. And we do want to own the stories of Scripture as our own and be very good stewards of them. And we want to own the reality that Christ is so close to us, closer than the beating of our own hearts. These are the messages that come to us in Advent, and it's the goal of the preacher. But this, for me, is a messy text. It's gotten into my head. My experience with it has not been orderly, like the writer wants us to have an orderly account. Because these birth narratives can scare me. My grandmother, who I think about from time to time, she was a smart lady. She was born on the farm, died on the farm. She was good. First Presbyterian elder in her community was a woman. One of the first women to go to college. A dietitian at the hospital. She was fantastic. He was Presbyterian, so I don't have some of the hang-ups that John's mom gave him. And she said to me one time when I was preparing to be a preacher, she says, "You know, you think you're reading the Bible, but sometimes the Bible might just be reading you." Have you ever had that kind of experience where Scripture is reading you? Perhaps feels like it knows you, that can shape you, inform you. And you turn stewardship of yourself over to the text rather than the other way around. My grandmother liked that. One of my early parishes was a very, very rural place called Big Run, West Virginia. Big Run Christian Church. Small country church. Big cemetery around it. It was on the highest part in the county. I could look out the front of the parsonage and see Ohio. I could look out the kitchen on the back and see Pennsylvania. I loved it. And part of the role of the preacher was to sometimes be the sexton for the cemetery. Funerals were a big deal, as they should be. I'm concerned we're losing some of that. Have the big feast, have the big party, care for each other, and say something good about the person's life in the way that Christ loved them and promised to redeem them. But the cemetery had to be dug by hand. So when we needed it, one of my jobs was to go out and find the crew that would dig the grave. And I had very, very different options depending on my budget. There was a professional group that I could get if I had the money to get to them. If things were really tight, I had to go down to the liar's bench in town, where guys would sit around and tell lies to themselves and entice them to come work for me. And I didn't have much money. So it was always I always felt bad that I wasn't really doing the best. And I'd have to get in and help because they didn't measure twice. You get the thing. Most beautiful parish you would ever come across. Here's why this text is in my head today. I mentioned that our two girls, but really we have three. Not every birth story is smooth and easy. And when I was a young preacher, Zechariah wasn't so young, but I was. I still think I'm 24. It's the darndest thing. I think everybody my age is 24. I like that. My wife had a difficult pregnancy, and I knew I probably was only going to take one of them home, but I didn't know which one. This is where Bible reads. So when our daughter Madison was born, and it was a surprise, just too soon. Held her, loved her, blessed her. And our hearts were broken. I get Zechariah because I couldn't talk for him. I was mute. That's the part that you can go back and check it out between 15 and 23. I know what it's like to be in the sanctuary and to have something visit you and not be able to speak. And my wife, the most giving person I've ever met, when she came out of the operating room, this is what I got. Zecharitis, like laryngitis, but he said, I'm sorry. Now, what in the world would she ever have to be sorry? This is the kind of bad juju, bad theology that creeps in sometimes. And this is some of what was happening in this text. This woman, Scripture says, was disgraced. We can't get our head around that. In the Old Testament, there are issues of progeny. There are issues of land. If you got it, you're all right. If you don't, well, there must be something wrong. Be careful of that stuff. It creeps in. And we don't want to send the wrong message to people about God's grace and God's love. I couldn't speak. I had the Zecharitis. Jennifer was sorrowful. We were in disbelief, and disgrace were very close to us. And our whole future was not what we thought it would be. Now, I had to get someone to dig the grave. So when I called the elder at the church, and in the Disciples of Christ, our ministry was ordered in a threefold way from the beginning. When we arrived on the scene from Northern Ireland primarily, there was a sense that we got to get this ministry thing straight. And if we're starting with a new body, we'll go into the text that has a threefold ministry. And so our ancestors laid out the office of evangelist, which is what I'm doing. I'd be kicking it around wherever I could get. And then we had the local people who were called into the eldership. They were charged with spiritual care. And then we had the deacons, who were charged with the temporal needs of the church. Because the church has temporal needs. People have temporal needs. Because we're in bodies, we have to be taken care of. So our early founders set us up with people who would preach and proclaim the good news, elders would help us keep the spirituality before us, and the deacons would keep the temporal needs of the church. But at the center of all this was the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. And this is primarily where their ministry was made visible. But there was a whole lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes. And the hardest thing that I could get to happen, and I was struggle with, was getting them to meet and getting them to take that ministry on in the way that I thought it was to be taken on. So a couple of days after this happened, by the way, when we returned to the house, there was a deacon there. And he opened the door for my wife. I couldn't speak. He was one of my best friends. But I didn't have to speak. Because in Pectora, as we were preparing, just trying to get through this thing and trying to figure out what was going on, I see a meeting of the deacons and the elders happening at the church. And I was conflicted. Thinking, how in the world, first of all, there shouldn't be any meeting without me. I mean, that was a weird thing I remember thinking about. You know, who do they think they are? What in the world are they doing? And how did they all get there? A little bit later, a knock on the door, and it was Eddie Phillips, Black Angus cattleman. Came to the door and he said, "Preacher, I just want to tell you, we got the best crew." Spiritual and temporal ministry of our elders and deacons was a big deal in that moment. I'm telling you this not to bum you out, okay? But I want you to know that God continued to visit us again and again and again. At night, when it was the darkest, have you ever had those kind of nights where you just lay there and think, what did I do? Why? How? Is God punishing me? Why? Some people have had those moments. Again and again, God would come. Sometimes God would come in the form of angels. They looked like us. Don't blink. You don't want to miss it when they come by. Because oftentimes humans, even in the fleshy ways that we are humans, show up in grace, and show up in time, and show up and bring the deepest hope that two candles could ever offer. It was as if two candles were lighted in us and warmed us in places that were going cold and illumined us. And God visiting us is the only explanation I can come up with as to how I would ever be able to speak, how she would ever be able to dance or get excited or become enlivened about what was happening. And the things that we thought were disgraceful were not disgraceful. The things that we thought were sorrowful, but for different reasons. And we learned about a God who was closer to us than the beating of our own hearts, who, like a daddy who loves his daughter, maybe doesn't always offer maximum protection, but certainly provides maximum. The only explanation is that Emmanuel, which means God with us, is real. And that's where we find ourselves in the second Sunday of Advent. God is very, very close. Very, very close to me, you, and to you. And this text this week makes sense to me as it never has before. And maybe this is an Advent gift, to get to spend time in it and to receive it and to be reminded that in the economies of God, a God who I really do think hates waste, I'm going to go down thinking that one. But this God who can take pain and reformats it, will not waste it, is right here. So don't blink. Maybe you can find yourself in this story too. And my grandmother would say, maybe this sacred bit of Scripture is reading you. Where is God meeting you? Because God comes to meet us again and again. God doesn't just visit and skedaddle. God stays. This morning I was at the Pittsburgh airport, first time in a new terminal. It was beautiful. New carpet everywhere. Just opened. I had a friend who, a couple weeks ago, flew out of the old one, flew home into the new one. That's kind of neat, that you can go out one way and come back a new way. That's a gift in its own self. I made my way to my gate bright and early. I'm a morning person. There are two kinds of people at the airport in the morning. People who love to be there early and people who are really angry to be there early. And I often find they're married to each other or traveling each other. Have you noticed that? It's like there's one poor guy going through the security. I felt so bad for him, but I couldn't help him. He just wasn't getting on board with what his wife said to do. And as I was sitting there, I noticed there was a woman who I thought was about my age, in her early 20s, and she had on a sweatshirt that said, Harvard Law School, Biblical Law Program. I'd never heard of this. Now, when you have a kid who goes to a good law school, one of the things that you're obligated to do is get the shirts and you wear them out because you want everybody to know that you're associated with this. And so I said to her, can I ask you about this program, because I'm really interested in it. I've not seen this. She says, my daughter goes there. I said, well, you're only 24 years old. How can your daughter go there? She says, 58. This is how it goes. We don't age. That's about the time I kicked over $12 worth of coffee on the new carpet, and we were off to the races. So we started talking. I said, well, I've been to divinity schools. I didn't go to Harvard. Not everybody can get into Vanderbilt, so some people have to go elsewhere. And I said, and I have a daughter who went to law school. She said, oh, yes, I'm very proud of my daughter. And so what kind of law does your daughter do? I said, well, she's a civil rights healthcare litigator. So she's doing civil litigation for ex-criminals who are coming out of the penitentiaries, trying to break down barriers to employment and barriers to health. It's really God's work. Really proud of her. She got more than she asked for. And just then, a few seats over, this gentleman who I didn't think was connected to her because they were sitting apart, he was the morning guy, she was the nighttime guy person, and he had a voice like a symphony, big, booming, and African dialect. He said, you, my friend, are blessed. Sitting in the Pittsburgh airport, heading off to preach in New York City, I just got blessed. This priest from somewhere around the world showed up and reminded me of the goodness of God. Don't blink when you're around the global nature of God's grace. It often shows up in people who look different. Then I got on the plane. As gracious as this cat was, the guy behind me, not so much. I sat down, he punched the back of the, he said, put your seat up, you're on my knees. You paid $250 for the ticket in the back of the plane. I know what you paid for this thing. Of course your knees are up in my seat. That's what we get. Said, he was just in a bad mood. He was snapping at the steward, who was different than he was. He wasn't nice to his wife. He gave me the rocking chair a few times. I became uninterested in the blessing that I had received. And just as I'm about ready to blow, I thought, I don't want to be on the news. I don't want to be that guy, but I understand I got to get to the church. I don't like to be late. I don't have enough money on me to get myself out and there. Your lawyers are too much up here. I caught myself, but at the end of the plane, he did it again. I was standing up, and I thought, if I just hit this guy as hard as I possibly can, no one else will see it. We're done with it. I'll grab my bag, and I'm out the door. I'll be in the car and gone. And then I reminded myself, I'm not 24. My linebacker days are gone. I was not my best self. And then my angel, with the symphonic voice, this maestro of grace, saw me and smiled. I think he probably saved me from my own moment of disgrace. They still come around. And he reminded me. He looked at me and he smiled. He said, blessed. 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 On the second Sunday in Advent, where Zechariah and Elizabeth and all of us are being called to a new way a better way. Perhaps God visits you like this too from time to time. Like Elizabeth and Zechariah, there's something that's being announced that calls us to a new and a better way. And again, my strong pastoral hunch is that God just hasn't visited you, but God has made a home in your very heart. My advice to you is don't blink, because you don't want to miss it. If you feel yourself like a mother whose children are coming home getting excited, and you start to get antsy, live with that. You find yourself getting hopeful about something that might be new that's growing inside of you, don't be afraid to deliver that. You really don't want to miss it. On our journey to Bethlehem, on the Sunday of hope, remember, God's closer to you than the beating of your own heart. There's nothing disgraceful about that. There's everything graceful about it. It's the good news, and it's a gift. Park Avenue Christian Church, you are the salt for the earth, light for the world. Stay salty. Keep burning. Keep shining. Keep singing. Keep proclaiming. Keep birthing the things of God. And all peace. Always love. Wish my angel was here, that he could say to you, you are blessed.